you'll want to download the Task Manager Apple shortcut template as well. It just contains a very simple task database. So our task database just consists of a name property, which you can see here, due date, status, assignee, done, date property, and type. In fact, we should probably move that over there. And so, this shortcut is meant to be relatively simple so that we don't have to get too technical when we're creating it. But we're covering a lot of different property types here. We've obviously got title property, select property, date property, status property, user or person property there. And so as we go through this, you will be sort of seeing how to create entries in your Notion databases for all of those different types of properties. And we'll also be going through the process of setting up the shortcut to update entries in your database too. And so that's a slightly different process, which involves sort of piecing together various bits of content as part of the API request. And we will run through that in detail as well. All right. So to start with, if I just quit my Apple shortcuts altogether and reopen them. This is that page that I was just referring to, by the way, sorry. Yeah, hopefully you can see everything you would need to see there. And then if we open Apple shortcuts, and just go into this folder, I'll create this new shortcut from scratch, obviously. So we'll call this Task Manager Apple shortcut. We can customize the icon and the color of the icon. I'll just make that blue to make that a little bit different. And the first thing that we're going to want to do here is basically create a sort of list of settings which we're going to refer to throughout the rest of the shortcut. So obviously, because we're making requests to Notion's API, we need an API key. We need to store the Notion API version in case that changes in the future and we just want to quickly update it. And we need to store the ID of our task database. So if we add API key as a key in this dictionary, API version and database ID, like that, then the next thing we're going to want to do is to go to the My Integrations page. So let's do that from Notion. If we go to our settings and down to connections, then we have an option at the bottom of this list to develop or manage integrations. And that's going to take you to notion.so/profile/integrations. And if we click on new integration here, call this integration whatever you'd like. So you could call it something like Task Manager, then type in and then just choose internal just there. We can add a logo if we want to make this a little bit more recognizable when we go to look at our list of connections and choose this integration, but we can just leave that blank as well and then click save. Once we've done that, we are going to see this field here, which contains our internal integration secret. And if I just show that now, as a general rule, you should never display these to anybody else. These are basically a password which gives anybody who has access to your internal integration secret access to any of the content in your Notion workspace that you've shared with it, including user information in this instance. But obviously I will get rid of this API key once we're done. And so we want to copy that. But we also just want to go through and check that the integration has access to everything that we need it to have access to. So we've got read content, update content, insert content just there. And then we do need the integration to have access to users so that we can assign tasks to users from our workspace, but we don't need it to have access to email addresses. So if you want to be, if you want things to be a little bit more secure, you could just choose that option there. So if we click save, having already copied the internal integration secret, or you can copy it now, then we can go back to our Apple shortcut and paste that into that field there. The API version hasn't changed for quite some time, so I'll just copy that from my clipboard history. It's 2022, June 28. And then the database ID will be the ID of our database, which we can get. Generally, the easiest way to get the ID of a database or a page in Notion is to open it in full page view and then click on the URL bar. And it's this part of the URL. So after the workspace name and the / there, but before the question mark and the view ID, which is just there, that is your database ID. So if we copy that, we will drop that into the settings. And those are all of the details that we need to store at this stage about for our settings, essentially. So now that we've done that, we just need to extract our settings from that list so that we can reference it later on. And if we go to, so if we just type in API key in our get dictionary value and choose dictionary there, we can rename this dictionary variable to settings like that. And then we can add another get dictionary value and type in API version. And we can choose our settings. So if we right click there and choose settings, we can select that same dictionary here again. And then lastly, get dictionary value and choose database ID and choose settings. We could have just stored these different settings as text in text steps like this, and referenced the contents of these steps directly later in our shortcut. But storing them in a dictionary like this just makes things a little bit neater and tidier. So it obviously allows us to sort of define names for these different values and the values themselves. And then potentially in the future, if you created a settings shortcut which you use to store these settings in so that you could share them with multiple different shortcuts, you would be storing the content in the same format here. And so that would allow you to sort of extract those settings easily. So now that we've got those, we've just got a couple of lists that we need to create as well, because we have a couple of drop-down properties in our database. Oops. So if we get rid of that option for now, if we have a look at our database here, first of all, we've got a couple of types. So we've got personal and we've got work, like that. And then we've also got a list of statuses. So we've got not started, in progress, and done. One thing to mention, you do need to be a little bit careful when you're adding the options for your statuses and actually for your select dropdowns as well. In the case of status properties, these options are case sensitive. So if you typed in progress there with a capital P, you wouldn't be able to, you would get an error when you tried to send that value to Notion via the API. If you typed in work in lowercase for this select property option, that would just create a new option in the database for you. So yeah, just double check that when you enter it. And that basically gives us all of the drop-down options that we need to choose from just there. So we're ready to get started. And basically, the way that I'm going to set this shortcut up is it will allow you to both create and update tasks in your task database. So we are going to add a choose from menu step next. And we're just going to say create or update will be our two options here. Would you like to create or update a task is going to be the prompt. And the way that these menu actions work here is that as you anything that you drop into the create sort of space there will be what is processed once you choose the create option here. Anything that you put in the update section is going to be what's processed when you choose update. So let's just run the shortcut and sort of see what we've got so far. So when you run it, you'll see that that brings this menu up here, and then obviously you can choose from either of these options. Okay. Next up, we need to create our new task. So we are going to add a few steps here. And by the way, I've pinned some of these actions in this list here. So if you see any action like get variable, when you're searching your different actions to choose from, you will have a pin option here. And that just adds it to this list right here and makes it a little bit easier to get to. So that's why that list is there, and that's how to add items to it. That just saves you a little bit of time as you're going through the process of creating shortcuts and you're using the same actions very regularly. Okay. So first of all, we want to ask for input and choose that option there. And that question is going to be task name. And that's literally all we need to do there. We could add a default answer or allow multiple lines. We probably don't want to allow multiple lines really. But yeah, that's literally all we need. And that's going to give us, if we run the shortcut and create, that's going to give us a field here that we can use to enter our task name, just like that. So that gives you that output. Then we want to choose from list, and we want to select an item from our list of types, task types. So we can rename that variable now that we've selected it. And we can enter a prompt here, task type. If this was a multi-select property that you were going to populate, then you could choose select multiple there, but you probably don't want to do that at the moment, just to keep things a little bit more simple. And then if we choose from list again here, we can choose from our list of status options. So we'll rename that list status task statuses, and show more task status. Then we want to be able to set a due date for our new task. So we'll just add a ask for input step again, like that, and choose date as our input. If you wanted to capture, a particular time when your task needed to be completed by, as well as just the date, if you're very precise when it comes to managing your task list, you can choose date and time there, but we'll just keep things simple and choose date. So task due date. And then lastly, we are going to choose from a list of users in our workspace to allow us to choose the assignee for the task. So this is where things get a little bit more complicated. If we add a get contents of URL step here, the first thing you're going to want to do to kind of understand what you're doing here is to go to the Notion API reference documentation. So that's developers.notion.com/reference/intro. Or you can leave the intro bit out. And if you go to the users section or in the endpoints here, then there's this list all users page, and this explains how you can fetch a list of users from your workspace. So we can just copy the URL from here and paste it into our shortcut like that. But the other thing that you're probably going to want to do in order to make sort of creating this shortcut much easier and particularly sort of testing, creating the content for the pages that you're creating or updating is downloading the Notion Postman collection. So Postman is a service which allows you to test API requests pretty simply. And Notion has created this collection which basically gives you a predefined set of API requests that you can make. So all of the API requests that are available from the Notion API at the moment. And so if you create a free Postman account and download the collection into your workspace, or fork the collection, in fact, into your workspace, this will allow you to test each of the different API requests that you're going to be making, and it will help you to sort of format the content and see if there are any issues whilst you're doing that, both whilst you're creating the content to sort of try out, and obviously when you submit the requests and test them. So if we go to Postman on my desktop here, I have already downloaded a fresh version of the Notion API collection. The first thing you're going to need to do is go to the collection name in the sidebar just here and enter your bearer token, which is the internal integration token that you copied earlier. So you can actually do that from authorization if you click here. If you hadn't entered the API key or internal integration token already, you can hover your mouse over this label here and just paste that into here. Or you can go to variables, and I think if you paste the internal integration token into both of these fields, that will work for you. If that hasn't worked, then when you look at the authorization tab in the list all users request in the users folder just here, then you will see this will be red, and that will flag to you that that's not fed through. So just hover your mouse there, paste that in, and then you can save that update. Just make sure when you do enter the details here that you save them, obviously, otherwise you'll be wondering why it's not working when it should. And now that you've done that, the list all users request is very simple. It's just a get request, which is basically the most simple type of API request you can make. We're sending that to a URL. We're including our bearer token. We've actually got a couple of headers. So we've got the Notion version header, which we're going to be including in our request when we're using our Apple shortcut, and a few that have been added here automatically, which we don't need to worry about. And so now, if we just click on send there, that is going to fetch a list of users from our Notion workspace. And you can see here when we have a look at this list of results, I think this is ordered based on when the users were added, or maybe just in alphabetical order, I'm not sure. We've got me, so I'm listed there as a user. And then we've also got some bot users here as well. So we're not going to want to choose our bot users, obviously, as assignees for our task. So we'll filter them out in a second. But basically all we need for our shortcut is my name and my ID. So let's go through the process of extracting those details. First of all, we're just going to need to add the headers that we saw when we were looking at Postman. Sorry. Just here to our API request, so Notion version, and also the authorization header. So if we start with the authorization header and type in bearer, and then we can right click there, insert variable, and scroll back up to our list of values that we extracted from our settings earlier and choose that dictionary value. That's going to be our API key or internal integration token. So if we select that, and then we also add Notion version as our other header. We need to type in bearer there, by the way, just because this is a bearer token and that's what the API expects. So that's part of the value. You could include that obviously alongside your internal integration token here, or you can just type it in and then insert the variable afterwards. So if we right click and insert variable there and just choose API version, the API version setting, rename that as API version, then that's all we need. So if we just test that out now, we just need to choose create again, and we'll call that test. You can see all of the different options. Oh, I didn't rename that. That should be personal. And then we can choose a status and a date. We do need to allow the Apple shortcut to connect to our browser. So you'll see this the first time you run the shortcut, once you've added the get contents of a URL action. And then once we've done that, we get this error just here because something is wrong with my API request. So the authorization header is the issue there. It's saying the API token is invalid. And the reason for that is because we didn't pick up the API key because I mistyped that key right there. So if we go through there again, test and 1, not started, done. Then you can see here we've got a very messy list of results because it's just formatted as text. But you can see there's me and there's some bot users in here as well. So that's basically what we need at this stage, which is good. Let me just go back and rename that as personal. That's all we need there. Now that we've got those results, the next thing we can do is check whether we received an error when we made that API request and just handle it a little bit more gracefully than the shortcut did a second ago when we ran into that issue. So first thing we'll do here is get the object using a get dictionary value step from the contents of URL. So this is going to be our get users response. And the nice thing about all of the Notion API requests you make is they will all include an object in the response. If we have a look at these results just here, we can see that object key there along with some other sort of content here, which we don't need to worry about in this instance. And so this will either be list, page, database, a few different options. But the key option that we're looking for here is error, because that will tell us that something has gone wrong. So if we add an if here and we just choose the name of the result, the dictionary value that we fetched here. So we can call this get users object. If we choose name there, we just want to check whether it's error. And we need to spell error correctly. And then if it is error, first of all, we want to get the dictionary value and we want to get the message from our get users response. And then we want to show an alert, which is going to display that message. So first of all, we can add a title actually to our alert, get users response error. And then we want the content of that message to be the error message, which we've just extracted. So if we choose that variable and we choose get users error message like that, then if we make that mistake again at the beginning, you can choose create, test, personal now, not started, any date. Now we see a nice clean alert there with the error message, and that obviously tells us a little bit more detail about exactly what's gone wrong there as well. So that's really helpful. And then we can click cancel there to stop the shortcut from continuing to run. Potentially in some cases you would want to add a stop action here just in case you forget to click cancel, just to make sure the shortcut really does stop running at that point, because you probably don't want it to continue with that issue. And that's all you need to do there. But if we fix that issue and we scroll back down, then what we can do now is loop through our list of users that we fetched from that API request. So we want to, first of all, get dictionary value and get the results from the get users response. Then we want to repeat with each. As you can see, when you look at Postman and the request response here, we've got square brackets sort of at the beginning of this object, which it tells you that this is an array. So that's just a fancy developer word for list. And so each of the users here are in this list of results, and that's what allows us to repeat with each item in the list. So we'll call this get users results. And so we can loop through that list and basically extract the contents of it. So first of all, we're going to add an if here, and we just need to get a dictionary value first actually. And we want to check the type of user from our list of results. So if we type in get the value for type in the repeat item is the item in the list that we're currently processing. And we're saying if the name of the user type is bot, or is not bot actually, then we do want to process that user and add it to our list. Obviously, if it is bot, then we don't want to do anything with it at all. So we will just leave this otherwise step empty here. And that reminds me, I should have mentioned, you can always leave these otherwise sections of an if statement empty here. So if we just collapse this, you can see basically we're doing a test here. If that test is passed, then we're doing, 3 things. We can leave otherwise empty here, and that just, or alternatively, we could move all of these steps into that otherwise section. But if we do that, then if we have multiple if tests, we end up with lots of very nested actions, and it makes the shortcut pretty difficult to navigate. So I generally wouldn't recommend that where possible. If you can just avoid doing that and just do this instead, where we do an if, we have our actions that we want to do in here, and then we just leave that empty. That makes your shortcut a lot cleaner. So if the type is not bot, then we want to get the dictionary value for the list item's name. And we're taking that from the repeat item. And then we also want to get the dictionary value for the user's ID. And we're taking that from the repeat item as well. Now, basically what we're going to do here is store this list of user details in a dictionary so that we can create a choose from list step, which allows us to choose from a list of names and then gives us the value or the ID of that user once we've selected them. So in order to do that, we need to add a dictionary just here. Is generally the sort of quite a clean place to do that. We're going to set a variable called users to that dictionary. So we'll call this users dictionary. And then we are going to set dictionary values based on those 2 values that we've just extracted. So we want the username to be our key username, and we want the user ID to be our value. So we'll choose user ID there. And then we want to store, or we want to set that dictionary value in our users dictionary. So obviously variables by default are just sort of generic, but once we've set this variable to store the user dictionary, that sets that variable to be a dictionary, so then we can store our values in that dictionary here. And then if we set the variable here, users to that updated dictionary, call that updated user dictionary. That's going to store our selected users in the dictionary. So to check that's worked, let's just run our shortcut again. And and we'll just choose our random options. Then just choose a date there. And what we should see at the end here is a list of options, but it looks like our filter hasn't worked because we've got more than one option there, or maybe no, I think it probably has actually. So next, if we get our variable, get variable, users, so we can actually choose from our list of variables here. Variables that you explicitly define are usually sort of always kept in that list of options for you for easy access. Whereas once you have lots of variables in a shortcut, this list gets trimmed down, and so you don't always see all of your variables there, and you have to select them from earlier in the shortcut instead. But if we get users there, and then let's just add the choose from list step, which we're going to want to have in here in a second anyway. We'll move this into our update, our create step there. Let's just use this and we'll add task assignee as the prompt, because we're going to want to see that anyway. And this is basically going to allow us to see our list of users that we've generated from that step. So personal, null started, date, due date there, and then there we go. We have one user to choose from here because I am the only user in my workspace that doesn't have a type of bot. So might as well select me there. And you can see once we've selected me, we actually have I think this is a dictionary value here with my name is the key and my ID is the value. When we reference the selected choice from here, later on in the shortcut, that is going to give us the ID of the person that we selected here. And that's what we need in order to create the task page. So now we've got all of the content that we need in order to create our task. We just need to format that content so that we can send it to Notion's API and actually include it in the request. So to do that, we're just going to add a text step here. And if we go back to our Notion Postman collection, you will see here in this create a page step, I have already sort of constructed the JSON content that you would want to include in the request, in the create a page request. So this request obviously is going to create a new page in our task database with the new task. If I just undo all of these edits really quickly, you'll see here when you first download this collection, you will have some content in here. And this is actually quite helpful. First of all, if you do, if you want to configure a database with all of these properties. So, we've got type here with an option of article. We've got score out of 5, and we can populate that select property with stars. If you want to try that out, great. If not, you can just go through and delete the content from this example that you don't want. And because it includes quite a few examples of various different types of properties, we've got a URL property, a checkbox property, obviously a rich text property there. That just allows you to delete out the content that you don't need until you get to the point where you have something like this. And this is just going to make it much easier for you to sort of configure the property content in the right format. So here we've got the parent, and we've got a database ID field here. We are going to want to insert the ID of our database here in our Apple shortcut. So we'll do that in a second. And then we've got our properties. So we've got the name for the task name, type for the task type, status, due, and assigned to. If we have a look at the Notion API reference again, there is a page, developers.notion.com/reference/property value object, which displays sort of examples of all of the different types of properties that you might create or populate or fetch from the Notion API. And this is really useful for seeing exactly how we need to structure this content. Not going to lie, when you first start using Notion's API, if this is your first time using JSON content, which is what this is, it's not particularly fun to work with, but it's actually pretty simple once you get the hang of using it. And to help you with that, I have created a post on my Substack, which I have linked to in the description, on how to create JSON data in Apple Shortcuts. So that looks a little bit like this. If you go to my Substack, or you click the link in the video's description on YouTube, and this just goes through, an in-depth explanation of what JSON content is, how it's structured, how it's formatted, and then just goes through and gives you some really simple examples to begin with. I recommend using Raycast to do some formatting of your JSON content as a general rule, but Postman's also really good for that, as I'll show you in a second. And then we go through some really simple objects and sort of create more and more complex JSON structures, basically, for JSON data to help you get to grips with that. In any case, all you need to do here is copy the example Apple shortcut, which I've shared, or just go through and create this content from scratch. And as you can see, a simple example here is the due property. It's inside the properties object, which is inside the content as a whole. It's a date property, and we need to populate the start date. And so we're going to replace task due with the date that we've selected in our Apple shortcut here once we paste this into Notion. So if we do that now, if we go back to our shortcuts, you can construct JSON like this in a dictionary. That gets really fiddly once you need to include arrays or lists in the content, and also for something like this where you've got nested sort of structures for basically all of the properties. I generally wouldn't recommend doing that. It's much easier to use a text step to define your JSON content because you can copy and paste it from Postman into your Apple shortcut. And this is where you're probably going to test your API request to begin with, so that will save you a lot of time. The other good thing about Postman, or the other couple of good things about Postman, if you format your JSON content incorrectly, if you miss a comma out here, for example, or you add a comma here by mistake, it will highlight that for you and give you some sense that something is wrong, and maybe even a hint that helps you fix the issue. Also, you don't actually need to sort of format your JSON content neatly. And in some cases, you'll probably be copying and pasting from, the documentation or elsewhere. And so if you do that and you just want to make the content a little bit more readable before you test it, if you click on this beautify button here, that's going to format that really nicely for you. And so then when you paste that into your Apple shortcut, you will have this nicely formatted content, which is a lot easier to work with than it would be if you tried to do all of this indenting by hand. So now that we've got the JSON content in there, we can insert our variables. And so first of all, we want to insert the database ID from our settings. So database ID. Then we will add the name of our task that we have inserted when we asked for that input. So that's going to be, sorry for the scrolling, ask for input just there, and that will be task name. Then we want the task type. Which we can get from earlier in the shortcut just here. Task types. We want the status that we selected as well. And that's just reminded me, we could be using an API request to fetch our list of task types and status options from our Notion database. I'm not doing that in this example, just to keep things as simple as possible, because as you can see, this is already fairly complicated. But that is an option, and it's quite a nice option to use if you do want to not have to worry about keeping your lists of options up to date when you update them in Notion, obviously. Task due date. And then lastly, we've got our assign to property just there. So if we choose our selected user, task assignee, and that's all we need there. So that's our content for the body of the API request. Again, just to explain, if we go back to Postman here, we're looking at the create a page request. This is a post request rather than the get request. You've got a few different types of requests here: get, post, put, patch, sometimes delete are the most commonly used options. Because it's a post request, we can include some content in the body of the request. We're not just sort of choosing a URL to send the request to and expecting to get a response back. We're actually giving it some content to sort of process Notion's API. That is, we're giving Notion's API some content for it to process. And that's obviously what allows us to define the details of our new task. So params are empty here. Authorization is the same as it was for the get request. Headers are the same as they were for the get request, except we've now got this content type header as well there. And then the body just includes our new task content. So if we go back to our Apple shortcut now and choose the same get contents of URL action that we used before, so even though that's called get, we're also using it for this post request. We will clear that variable. We'll copy the URL from our Notion Postman collection just there. And then if we show more, we will change the method to post, and straight away you'll see that we have a request body option here that gets added. Now that we've chosen that type, we need to remember to add our headers here though, and not here. That can catch you out first. So let's do that. Authorization, bearer. And one of the nice things about naming our variables now is if we start typing their names into these fields, they should be brought up for us automatically. So Notion version. Mistyping these keys here is a really common sort of mistake that catches a lot of people out. So let's do version. Is that going to work? API version. Yep. And then if we just add the content type header here, I think this might work without that, but I'm not 100% sure. And it will cause some confusing issues if it doesn't. In fact, I'm pretty sure you do need that. I would definitely recommend including it. Then for our request body, if we choose file, we're not actually adding a file here. We're just adding some text from our text action. And this is going to be create task request body, like that. And that's all we need to do there to configure our API request. So we'll obviously add some error handling and things to this in a second, but why don't we test that out now? We do test, personal, not started, due, and we choose ourselves as the assignee and send that request. Then at the bottom of the shortcut here, we have a validation error. And the reason for that is when we added our date here, we did not choose a date format. So what we need to do is choose ISO 8601 as the date format. What a common mistake here is to choose the custom option and then format it yourself using the same sort of formatting that you use when you format dates in Notion formulas. Luckily, Apple Shortcuts include this option here, which is used by most APIs when you're sending dates to them or retrieving dates from them as well. We can switch the toggle on if you're setting times for your task due dates, then obviously you do want to include this as well, and that's going to take care of the formatting. So let's try that again. Done, personal, not started, due today, and assign to me. And if we scroll down the page here, we have a typo in here from where I was testing this earlier. So let me just triple check that that's set up correctly now. So people needs to be formatted like that, and the assign to needs to be an array as well. So if you've copied the Apple shortcut from the example that I put in the chat earlier, you will have the correct version of this content already. But if not, we just need to add the task assignee there, like that, and then we should be good to go. So Notion wants this to be a list of people, even if you're just inserting one in the property. And so if we run this now, test, personal, not started. Obviously, I'm making all of these mistakes so that you can see these common errors that could trip you up. Totally intentional. And so once that's processed, we can't find our database. So last thing that could trip you up here is not sharing the database with your new connection. So task manager, you'll need to go to the 3 dots in the top right hand corner of the page. Once you've opened the database in full page view here, go down to connections. And if you've got lots of connections in your workspace like me, select the name of the connection that you created towards the beginning of the video in order to give that connection access to your database. And so now, hopefully this is going to work. Personal not started. Due, assigned to me once again. And if we scroll down here, we have something that looks a lot like the type of response that you would expect to receive from Notion's API when you've just created a page in a database. So where has that page gone? Do I just need to refresh the page maybe? I do. There we go. So here's our test page. If we just open that in SidePeek, we've now got an entry here with a status, a due date, an assignee, and a type. I should have mentioned you could just leave the status out of your request content. Obviously, if you've set the default value here to be not started, and you want to always use that option by default. But if you want to be able to set some tasks to in progress, for example, or even record completed tasks, and you would want to still have those options. And that's basically everything we need there. We'll also see, if we have a look at my inbox here, I've received a notification now when that task was created. That's not something you can avoid at the moment when you're assigning tasks to yourself via the Notion API. Hopefully it's something they'll make a lot better in the future. But that's all we need to do to create our task. So obviously we should add some error handling to this request as well. So let's fetch the object from our create task response. We'll add an if check here again and change that to create task object. Just need to choose the name there and then set that to error. If there's an error, then we will get dictionary value and we will get the message from our response. Let's clear that then and choose create task response. And then we will show an alert with a title, create task error. Okay, and that error message is going to be this one. Call that create task error message like that. And that's all we need right there. So let's just delete a comma from this example, which is definitely going to cause an error. And actually the other thing that I would generally do when you're creating JSON content like this to send in the body of your API request. So you've got sort of lots of content and you could potentially run into issues with it. I would generally add another alert here, which will be displayed if there is an error. Create task JSON body to display the content that was sent to Notion's API, because that can often help you to spot the issue. You could also add a step to copy that content to your clipboard as well. So you can paste it back into Postman and see what the issue is there a little bit more clearly, but that will generally help. So we've now added that there too. If we do create, test, personal, not started, due today, and assigned to me, then we've got our error message here. Error passing JSON body, that's saying there's something wrong with the JSON content you created. And we have a preview of that content right there. And so if we were really looking at this closely, we might spot that we're missing a comma after the due there. Whenever you're creating sort of lists and they contain objects in JSON content, those objects are always separated by commas like that. So that's all we need. The last steps that we'll take here will be to get the dictionary value for the URL in the create task response here if there wasn't an issue. And we will add an alert. Actually, we don't need to add a menu action here. View, let's do task created. Ta-da. View in Notion. Show more. And we don't need a title at all there. So then when this alert is displayed, we can choose to just click cancel or click the cross as well if we don't want to open this link in Notion. But if we do, we will just click continue, as you will see in a second, and open URLs. And the URL that we're opening here is going to be the URL of the task that was just created, which Notion handily gives us in the response from that create task request. New task URL. It's going to be the name of that variable. So let's go through this one more time. Create, test, personal, not started, due today, and assigned to me. Once that task has been successfully created, we can choose OK here, cancel here, obviously, if we don't want to view the task in Notion. But if we do, then that's going to open that brand new page for us right there. And so then we can go through and update it, change the scheduling or do anything else that we want to do there, or just check that the task really was created successfully, just like that. And that is everything that you need to do to set up an API request to create a task in your Notion task database from an Apple shortcut. So you've seen how to add sort of contents to lots of different properties here. Obviously you can adapt, the same sort of process to create Apple shortcuts that will create all types of entries in, various different Notion databases. Once you've done that, you can choose to pin the shortcut in your menu bar, which then allows you to click in the menu bar and see a list of shortcuts here and choose from them to run these quickly. If you have Raycast, you can choose Task Manager, Notion shortcut. Once probably Raycast hasn't quite picked that up yet, but you can run that shortcut really quickly from Raycast once that's been picked up there. Obviously, you can use this shortcut on your phone, or you can just open the Shortcuts app and run it from there as well. Now, what if we want to also have the option to update some of our tasks in our Notion database? The process here is going to be fairly similar in terms of creating content that we want to send to Notion's API, obviously to update a particular task. But first, we're going to need to fetch our list of tasks. from our task database. And we're also going to want to be a little bit clever about, allowing ourselves to update particular properties rather than just having to update every single property for the task every single time we run the shortcut. So let's go through that process. First of all, we will add a text action to our shortcut. Just here. And we're going to want to define a set of filters that we're going to use to pick up our tasks. So if we go to databases in our Postman collection here, query a database, you're going to see something like this. The way that Notion's Postman collection is set up is it allows you to store the database ID and the page ID in some cases as variables to use in your requests. Because you generally change those for each different request you make, I wouldn't recommend storing them as variables. You would have to go to here, database ID, every time you go to update that in a request. So that's a little bit of a painful process. I generally delete the variable placeholder there and just insert the ID of my database directly instead. So if we do that just there. This is a post request again. Post requests are usually used to create content in a database, whether that's a Notion database or a more traditional database. But Notion uses post requests when you're querying databases as well, which would often just be a GET request, because that allows you to send some JSON content in the body of your request. So again, we've just got authorization, Notion version, and a content type header here. And then the body of our request looks a little bit like this. And this is the filter and sort criteria that you're going to want to apply when you make that request. So in this instance, sorting our list of pages is not going to be any help to us, because when we go to choose from our list of pages that we fetched to choose the page that we want to update, that list is going to be randomly ordered because it's been stored in the dictionary, and dictionaries don't store content in a particular order. So that's a little bit annoying, but as long as you don't have too many tasks, it's not too much of an issue. So we can remove the sorts content from our JSON data here, and we can just keep this filter. Now, obviously, we've got a filter option here, although on a status property, but this is actually going to be a status property for us rather than a select property. So let's change that. And we don't want the status of our task that we're fetching here to be done because they've already been completed. Presumably, they don't need to be updated. If we have a look at Notion's API reference again, go to databases, query a database, filter database entries. I'll just put that link in the chat for you. Then we can go down to the status example here. And this documentation just gives us a list of different property types and gives us some examples again of the content that we would want to use if we were filtering our query to find pages in our database which have particular content in them. The options that we've got for filtering a status property to sort of modify, do we want this thing? Do we not want this thing? Are equals, does not equal, is empty, is not empty. In this instance, we want the status to not equal done. So we'll copy that into there. But the other thing that we'll probably want to do here is set some date filter criteria. So we want that to be inside an array here, I'm pretty sure. Let me just double check that. I'm just going to pull this over for a second. I'm going to check my own personal copy of, of this shortcut, which was the thing that I made, that prompted me to record this video in the first place. And that's telling me we need an array of filter options. So we just need to restructure this a little bit. So when you want to add more than one piece of filter criteria here, we need an and we need that to be an array. So open square brackets in there will open that array for you. Then we can paste that copy content into there and wrap it in curly braces like that. And that's basically how we'll format that first piece of filter criteria. Now, Notion's documentation does explain how to create filters like that in this compound filter conditions section. So here we're just doing and we're adding an array here for our filters, and then we're adding our filter criteria. And as you can see here, we can actually do more sophisticated things in terms of creating the filter content. So we can actually get pretty close to replicating the filter functionality that we have in Notion itself. If we wanted to add an or, we would structure it a little bit like that. So now that we've got our and there, we can copy this just to speed things up a little bit, paste that into there, beautify that, and just choose our due date property as our next piece of filter criteria. If we go back to Notion's API reference, we can see we want this to be on or before the date 7 days from now. So on or before, and then we'll add our due date there. And as you can see again from this example, we're adding a filter here. We've got the property name, it's a date property, and that's our condition. So that's how we would be structuring this content here. Now that we've got that, if we go back to our Apple shortcut, we can paste that into here, and we can remove that placeholder. If we right click here and insert variable, then we can add the current date, or in fact, we don't want to use the current date, we want to adjust the date. So let's adjust the current date here. We'll insert a variable, we'll insert the current date there. Doesn't matter how that's formatted. We will add 7 days to the current date. And so basically this is going to allow us to fetch all of the tasks which have a due date, which is in the past. So obviously that'd be overdue, or a due date which is up to 7 days from today. If you want to change that and only pick up tasks which are due in 3 days or less, then obviously you can update that criteria nice and easily. So that's really helpful. And if we select our variable there, we'll choose our adjusted date. And once again, we need to format that date using the ISO 8601 standard like that. We don't need to include the time. And that is our date criteria. So now that we've got the content for the filter in the body of our request, we can go ahead and get contents of URL to make our post request. We are posting our request to this URL just here. We will add the ID of our database. Is that going to be picked up automatically? No, it's not. So we'll insert a variable and we will choose that from our settings again. So as you can see now, the reason why we predefined that sort of list of settings at the top of the shortcut before we got into the create or update logic is that we can access it in both places here. And that saves us a little bit of time. We're going to change the method to a post. We're going to add our headers, authorization, bearer, API key, and we're going to add the Notion version, and we'll do version, API version. Lastly, we need our content type, and that's going to be application JSON. You could store the content type in a variable in your settings as well, obviously. In theory, that could change. If it did, though, you would have to update the shortcut anyway, because this content would no longer be valid. So it's probably not worth doing that. And then if we select a variable, we will, we will go back to, we'll choose our text variable there. And query database JSON body is going to be the name of the variable. Don't need to select the name there. And that's all we need. So since we had, we ran into errors the last couple of times we made these requests, and it's a lot easier to process those errors or sort of look at those errors once we've added our error handling. I'm going to do that now this time. So we'll get dictionary value for object in the query database request. We'll add our if, and that will be if the value for the object name query database object is error, then we will get the message from the response. That's really annoying. Let's see if I can just pull that up. There we go. Okay. That's going to be there. So message, get value for message, and then we will show an alert. Query database error. We'll insert that error message just here. And we'll show another alert. Query database JSON body to display the body in case that helps us to troubleshoot. That should be the title, and then we're just going to insert that JSON content right about here. Okay, so that looks good to me. Let's run the query. Update. And if we scroll down to the bottom of the page here, we have a list. So that would be, that's the object that it's giving us there. So obviously that would be error if there was an error. So of course, the first time we add error handling in advance, it works perfectly. That's nice. All right, let's continue. Now that we've got our list of pages, if we just submit that request in Postman, let's just try that. That didn't work because we didn't actually have a date in there. Just want to check that ID correct. Yes, it is. Okay. So our date is going to look something like 2025-02 26 for less than 7 days in the future. And that's that. So now you can see from our Postman request, we've got a list of results just here. The preview can be quite nice for browsing through those results, although Notion's JSON content is pretty, has a lot of content in it, so it can be a little bit tricky to read those results there. So list of results here, this is a list of pages obviously, and the details about those entries. So once again, we're going to loop through that list of pages and we're going to create a list, a nicely formatted list to choose from so that we can select the task from our task database that we want to update. So we need to add a dictionary to our shortcut next. We need to set a variable to that dictionary. So that's going to be tasks dictionary, or just tasks actually. And then we need to get the dictionary value. Query database request. Yeah, that should be fine. Results are the thing that we want to extract there. And then we can repeat with each item in our list of results. So we'll just rename that database get task results. We want to get the dictionary value for the page name. So this is where things get a little bit trickier. As you can see from these results here, we have our results list. Inside that we have our pages. For each page we have a properties object. And then for each of those properties, we have a name here, which is a title property, which then has the name of our task in the plain text field here. And we're going to have to navigate all the way down that path in order to extract the name of our task. So we need the properties sort of key. Let's go back through this step by step. Sorry, so yeah, properties. Then the name of our task property is name. That contains a title key, which is our array. So since we want to get the first item in that title, just to keep things simple for now, you could potentially get sort of every item in this array if you were going to have complex titles with formatted content in them, but hopefully you don't for a task list, and we can keep this simple. So in order to access the first item in the title array or list, we need to add a 1 there. So that's going to be the first item in the index. Apple shortcuts use 1 as to get the first item rather than 0, like Notion formulas. So that's just a slight quirk, which is a bit more user-friendly, and I wish Notion had done it, but they didn't, to try and be a little bit more traditional. And then now that we've got the first item from this list, we can just access the plain text property. I'm just going to pull this back in to make sure I can see everything. So just bear with me there. Okay, plain text. Cool. That should give us the title of our task. So now that we've got that, we can also get the ID of our task, which should be a lot simpler. We're literally just selecting ID there. P item, there we go. Now we want to set a dictionary value to the name of the task and the task ID. So task name and task ID. Like that. And we're going to set that for our task dictionary. Then we're going to set our variable for our task dictionary to that updated dictionary. And that's all we need to do there. Now we can get that variable once we've finished looping through our list of tasks. So that's going to be tasks, like that. And we're going to choose from that list, choose some tasks, so we could call that select task. So let's run this now and see if that works. And there we go, this is what we end up with. So here we've got a list of all of the tasks in our task database with the name of the task and obviously the ID of the task as well to choose from. If we choose that task, then when we scroll down to the bottom of the page here, we can see that task has been selected. The only thing is we might also want to see the status of our task and our due date. So in order to do that, let's add a text action to our loop there. If I can find it, there we go. And we'll add in our task name variable, followed by a hyphen. So we'll do get dictionary value. And we'll choose properties again. This time we'll add the status first, I think. So that should be status, I believe, and then name maybe. Let's just double check that. So we've got status, which is obviously in our properties object. Key there is status, and then name is the value. So that's perfect. And we want to get that from our repeat item again. And we want to do the same thing to extract our due date. So properties, due, date, and start, I think is the path there. Properties, due, date, start. Perfect. From our repeat item. So now we can add those variables to our text section. That will be status. Task status. And if we add another hyphen, we can insert our due date. Which is there. Task due. And since that's a date, actually, we want to set the type to date. And that's just going to allow us to apply a little bit of formatting to that date to make it a little bit more readable, because obviously the date when we fetch it from Notion's API looks like that, which is not super user friendly. So if we click on task due, we could not display the task time. If you're happy with that format there, great. One of the formats that I quite like in this context is relative. So that will tell you, task is due today, is due tomorrow, it was due a day ago, a little bit like the relative formatting in Notion for dates. So let's run that again, but first we just need to set the key there to our text. And the key that we choose when we're setting these dictionary values makes no difference to what's selected when we choose from the list. We're always going to get the task ID. This is just there for our reference, basically. So if we choose update, now we've got labels that look a lot more useful. Water the plants is not started, is due tomorrow. Take out the bins, it's not started, it's due today. And as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, we can't order this list based on the due date, but having those labels there makes it much easier for us to sort of identify the right task that we want to update there so that we can update it. So now we've got the ID of the task that we want to update. We can go ahead and update it. And first of all, basically what we want to do here obviously is, as I mentioned earlier, choose which of the properties that we want to update from the task. And I'm going to set this so that we can choose either just one property to update or multiple properties, and then show you how to sort of join the JSON content that you'll need to create for each of those properties together in order to actually send that update to Notion's API in the correct format. So we are going to choose from list, and I think this time let's just define our list here rather than at the beginning of the shortcut, because this is a list that we're only going to be using as part of our update step. So we can choose name, we can choose status. We could choose the assignee as well, actually. Let's just do that. Why not? And we can choose the due date. So those are our list of options. Choose from list here. If we select, switch on the select multiple option there, then we can add in which properties do you want to update. As our prompt. And so now when we run our shortcut again, just to try that out, we will choose update. we'll get our pages, we'll choose a random task, and then we can choose either one or multiple options there. So that's going to give us a list of selections. And basically what we want to do is define a variable to store our JSON content in here. Do we want to do that? So this is a piece that I haven't added to my personal shortcut yet, so I'm just trying to think this through on the fly. Let's do that for now, and I can always come back and change that later if necessary. So set variable, and then we'll set that to task updates. So now we've got a variable for task updates, which we can add our content to as we populate it as part of this process. Then let's just do an if here. Select our list of selected options. So select variable. And if the selected items, really, can we set that to list? Nope. Okay. Let's just show result. So one of the things you can do when you're creating these shortcuts as well is if you want to see what the output of a particular action is, the quickest way to do that is to add show result there, and that's going to show you that output. So if we do update there, choose a random task, choose two options here. Okay, so we basically do have a list like that. Fine. I'm not sure if that's actually a list or if it's just text, but we can work with that. So let's do is selected item contains name. Then we will allow ourselves to update the task name. So we'll ask for an input. That's going to be task name as the prompt. And then that's all we need to do there. Once we've added that, then we need to create our task name JSON content, and then we'll add that to our variable. So we will add a text action. Text, just there. And we will populate that with the content that we used to create our title in the first place. So that's going to look like this. Paste that in from Postman, but we don't need the comma at the end there at the moment because that would trip you up. Obviously, so one important detail to mention when it comes to creating sort of JSON content, it doesn't matter if you have, random spaces or tabs in your JSON content like this. They will be stripped out when the content is sent in the API request to Notion. So if if you paste the content in from Postman, it looks like this, don't worry about it. If that really bothers you, you could hold Shift and hit Tab there to tab away those tabs and then paste that in there. That's going to look a little bit neater, so why don't we do that? Okay, our task name then is going to be the output of our ask for input step, which is probably what just appeared there, but let's just select it to be sure. New task name. Make sure you always give these variables unique names, by the way, because otherwise, A, that becomes very confusing, and B, you can end up sort of overwriting the values from your variables later on in the shortcut by accident. So that's pretty important. And then we will repeat those steps to create the content for our other properties. So if selected properties, can we choose that now? Selected properties contains, what have we got? Status. Then we want to add our text with our status property content. It's going to be this, tap that back, delete that comma, and status. And we'll go back to our Apple shortcut there. And let's just get rid of that for now. There we go. That gives us our status once we populate that with an ask or a choose from input, choose from list step there. So again, we're going to be choosing from our list of status options that we predefined right here. And then we're going to be selecting that for our text content. Selected item, task, new task status. Then we've obviously got our user or our assignee to choose from. So we're going to have to replicate the API request that we used to fetch our users. And to speed things up here, I'm just going to copy the steps that we created here. If I can, this might get a little bit messy, but we'll give it a go. Get users, choose some users. Okay, so that should be all of that content. If selected properties includes users, users like that, then we want to paste that content into there. Ooh, that did bring in pretty much everything. Not sure if I did copy the API request there or not actually. So let's just try and do that as well. Users, get value for object. We want all of the error handling as well, just to save ourselves time there. And that might be everything that we need. Let's see if we paste that there. That's at the top, that's perfect. Get contents from users, get users response. We are mixing variables exactly in the way that I said we shouldn't there in terms of having variables with the same names here. I don't think that's going to be an issue in this instance. So let's see how that goes. Get users response obviously is the value that we want to reference there. Get users results. Okay, I think that might be all right there. And then we just need to add a text step to insert our users JSON, or once we've selected our user just here. So that's going to be assigned to, and copy that in. Add the ID. Another thing that can catch you out really easily here is not including speech marks around the ID. So make sure you do that. That's assigned to. Oh, and then the thing that I have been forgetting to do is once we have selected, so I'm just going to collapse. I'm going to collapse this. And I'm going to collapse the repeat section here just to keep things a little bit tidier. Once we have added that text content, obviously it's no good just storing it there. What we need to do is add it to our variable. So if we choose set variable and we do, no, in fact, we want to add to variable, we're going to add that text task name content to task updates. I'm not sure we even needed this text step here, to be honest with you, but let's keep it in there anyway. We need to add this text content to our task updates variable. And when you use the add to variable action here, that creates a list of bits of content in the variable. So we're going to end up with a list of all of these text snippets in a single variable. And then we will process that and format it in just a second, as I will show you. So we will add the task status content to our, what was it called? Task updates variable here. Then we've got our users content. Just there. User updates content. And lastly, we've got a text property to handle. So if okay, that's helpful. Once you start adding a lot of content to Apple shortcuts, they can be a little bit more tricky to work with. So if we do that instead, then that allows us to insert our new action exactly where we want it to go. Select the properties, contains, what was it? Assignee. Yeah. Oh no, so we just did assignee, so we want due. So due text and our text content is going to be assigned. No, it's going to be due, which is missing from here. No, it's not. It's just there. And there we go. Copy that, paste that into there. Delete that content from there. We will ask for input like that. We need a date and we want task due date. Once we've fetched that task due date, we can select that as our value. New task due date. That's going to be a date. It's going to be formatted like that. Don't need a time, so that should be it. And that's all we need there. Lastly, if we add this to our variable then, add to variable, we will store that in our list of property content, task updates. All right, perfect. So why don't we get that variable once we've finished processing all those properties and just check that the content looks okay. So we will show result. Run that, update, we'll choose a random task. We'll add the name and status. Let's add everything just to make sure that's working. Test, not started, due today. Ooh, and we can get an assignee option. Okay, so that's our properties which have been populated. That shouldn't include a time though. I guess that formatting didn't save. Okay, fair enough. Maybe I didn't choose it. Like that. Perfect. Okay. And then why weren't we asked about users? If that contains users, that's because we called that assignee. So let's just double check that's working as well. Update, first task, and assignee. Okay, fine. That didn't look like it fetched any users then. I need to remove that show result step. There we go. No, we want to keep that actually. Get users, choose some users. Okay, so this is probably an issue then with me copying and pasting that content from earlier. Get users results. Let's just remap. Let's just remap those variables. We don't actually have any error handling in here as well. Yes, we do. That's right there. So get users response. If the name is error, let's just make sure that's mapped correctly. Get users response. I think the rest of that should work okay, but let's not worry too much about that right now. Get users response. And those are the results. So let's just check and see whether that's now picking everything up correctly before we remap everything. No, it's not. Okay, let's check. That's why it's often more trouble than it's worth to try and copy and paste steps from earlier in a shortcut that you're repeating. So users, assignee, still nothing. I wonder if that's an issue with the logic that decides whether we're going to do this or not at all. Let's collapse that section to avoid any confusion there. And so we've got name status, selected properties contains users, then show get users response, and that's because that is assignee. All right, let's try that again. There we go. Okay, now we have a list of users, and we have some content there. Then we can choose our task assignee. Then we have an assignee for our task updates. Perfect. All right. Troubleshooting on the fly there. So that's all we need there. We can get rid of those, show result steps, and I think that's nice and tidy now as well. So that's perfect. Okay, so now we've got a list of different bits of JSON content that we would need to send in our request to update our task. But as I mentioned earlier, when we combine all of those bits of content, we need to format them as an array. So if we have a look at the update page properties request here, we can delete that ID placeholder. Let's just choose this. So if we open this page in full page view, we can copy the ID from the URL there. Paste that into there, And then if we go to the body, basically we want to be sending a patch request, which again can include content in the body with the properties that we want to update, and obviously what the new values of those properties should be. So if we wanted to set the status, which is a status property, to done, we would need a body like that. And actually this is not an array, is it? So we don't need to do exactly what I was thinking, but we do still need to have a comma separated list of bits of content. So update page properties. If we have a look at this example, there's only one element in there, so that's not particularly helpful. Okay. We just need a comma separated list of properties in there, I think. So let's just give that a go. Update page properties. If we want to mark that task as done, let's send that request. I just hit command and return there to submit that. And there we go. Our test page is now set to done. Let's reset that just so we've got an example to work with. In order to create that final piece of content then, we need to add another text step to our shortcut. And we just need everything here apart from the individual properties themselves to begin with. So that's going to be that. Paste that into there. We can add some tabs in there. And then that's basically what we're going to store our properties content in. But before we do that, we need to combine our list of task updates, and not with new lines. We want to add a custom separator and we want to add a comma there. So this is the functionality that allows you to sort of define content for as many different properties as you want to, or basically the contents of any array or any complicated object, sort of separately, and incorporate some sort of logic into your shortcut so that you can do things like selecting the specific properties that you want to update. And then by combining that list that we've created and stored in our variable with this comma separator, we have the flexibility to be able to sort of format that content correctly, and we don't have to add any really complicated logic, which is what I started doing in the beginning, to sort of figure out which of the properties piece of content was the last piece in the list, and then which bits should have commas separating them and which shouldn't. So now that we've combined those updates with commas, we can just insert those updates there. In fact, we can remove these spaces here just to make things really organized and tidy, and insert that content from here, the combined text, like that. And that should be all that we need, hopefully, to submit that request. So get contents of URL. We are making a patch request, as I just mentioned. We're making that request to this URL, which, if we just clear that there, we can assert the ID of the page there. And for our ID, obviously, we are choosing, or we're selecting the ID of the page that was selected earlier on when we asked the user to choose from our list of tasks. So that's going to be our selected task. Selected task just there. We need to add our headers once again. Authorization, bearer, API key. We need to add our Notion version and add our API version. And we should add our content type header as well. Make sure this is case sensitive, so don't get tripped up by that at all. Like that. And then we can add a file choose our variable, and we're choosing the page update or task update JSON body. Okay, once again, there's an even higher chance that we run into an issue here. So let's add some error handling. Get dictionary value for object, update page response. We will if that is error. Update page object. If that's error, then we will get another dictionary value for the message from the update page response, and we will display that message along with our JSON content. By selecting that. Like that, update page error message. And then we show one more alert, which is gonna include the task update JSON body. Apple Shortcuts is actually holding up for me pretty well here. It's not letting me choose that variable now. But usually it starts complaining. Yeah, let's just do that instead. Once you start working on a pretty long shortcut, and it's doing all right. Task update JSON body. There we go. So that's going to display that content for us. So let's give that a go. Update our page. We're going to set water the plants, status and due date. We're going to set the status to in progress, and we're going to bump that due date back. I'm assuming it was the 20th. So let's set that to the 21st. Got an error passing the JSON body. So what's the issue? We've got properties and we've got a comma before our status property name. Is that just a typo? Is the question. So that looks okay. So we don't have a comma there, obviously. We are inserting a comma when we combine our list, but that shouldn't insert a comma before the first item in the list. Let's show result there then. In progress, due on the 21st, show result, and that is adding, so we do want that comma separator there, obviously, after the status, but we definitely don't want it before the status, and I bet you that is because we are setting our variable to an empty text string before we start populating it later in the shortcut. So let's not do that then. And we're gonna not even, so our set variable action here will create the variable for us, I believe, if it doesn't already exist. So we don't actually need to predefine it at all. Let's just double check that. Okay. Let's just try setting it to nothing to begin with. Water the plants, status and due, in progress, due on the 21st. There we go, so no comma. And if we have a look at that task now then, water the plants is now due on the 21st and it's in progress. Amazing. We can check updates there. I think, yeah, there we go. Task Manager connection has updated those values for us, so that's perfect. Okay, and that's ready to go. So last steps, we probably don't want to add an option to open the page in Notion, to be honest, because we're probably going to be less worried about that if we're updating the task. I think we're just about done here. Yeah, let's just add a little alert here to say that the task was updated, because it's always nice to get that confirmation. But that's all we need to do. So we now have an Apple shortcut that does two things. It creates new tasks in our task database for us, and it allows us to update the properties in for those tasks, and choose, which of the properties we want to update. It could be one or it could be multiple, all from a single shortcut. Nice and easy to get to from your phone or your desktop, rather than going into Notion and finding your task database and doing that for you there. So that's really cool. We have obviously a few different views in this page here. So we've got a view of our incomplete tasks with filter to filter out tasks with a status of complete. We've got all of our tasks there. We've got a calendar view, just in case you like working with that type of view. One of the things I didn't mention actually was I've also added an automation to this database, which is triggered when the task is set to complete. You might know already, Notion automations don't trigger other automations, but updates from the Notion API do. So we can have an automation here which says when the task status is set to complete, then we can set the done date to the time when that automation ran. And obviously that's the kind of thing where we could be selecting, we could be inserting that done date from our Apple shortcut. We could be selecting the done date, or we could just be predefining it and including that in our update content. But why go to the hassle of configuring that in your Apple shortcut if you do have the option to do that using a nice simple Notion automation instead? So that's why I've added that there for you. We've also got this view here of recently completed tasks, which is sorted by done date and grouped by done date as well. So we can see all of the tasks we completed within each week. So we can count all there to give us a count of those. And if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, we've got the completed this week tasks. I think it's this week. Oh no, this is actually all completed tasks at the moment, with a little bit of a breakdown of how many of those were personal, how many of those were for work. We could obviously add some filters to this chart to only display tasks which were completed this week or last week or whatever, last month. And maybe create multiple different views to give you that sort of more detailed breakdown. We can also see who's been completing how many tasks. I don't actually assign tasks to Marie, but she's in my workspace, so there we go. And again, we could be adding some more filters there. So those just give you a flavor of the sorts of tasks that you might, sorts of charts that you might want to create to analyze your completed tasks. Maybe you want to create some charts to sort of visualize which tasks you have that are left to do, how many are overdue. The possibilities, of course, are endless. But I hope you enjoyed the stream. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments still, and I will get back to you. And let me know if you did enjoy this and you would like me to do more live streams like this. I did not think this was going to take 2 whole hours to run through, but it was a fairly complicated shortcut. Hope you enjoyed it. Stick around, and you never know, I might do more live streams like this. I will definitely be creating lots more videos, about automations and Apple shortcuts in the future to help you to get to grips with this really powerful tool.